accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Green Lantern fans, thanks for joining us for episode number 150 of the podcast of OA. Some people call me the Space Cowboy, some people call me the Gangster of Love, but most people call me Myron Rumsey, and I am joined by my good friend Phil Bova. Phil, how is life in your end of the world right now?
Oh man, life's terrific. And by the way, I'd have to say that was probably the best opening I've ever heard you do, ever.
I'm in a Steve Miller mood tonight.
That was great. That was so great. Things are going well, man. Everything's great. St. Louis is finally in the throes of fall, so the leaves are starting to change. Everything's looking really, really pretty, and it's good. It's nice here.
We just got our first frost over the last couple of days, so it's going to be interesting to see how cold our winter is going to be, because it's not that cold yet. It shouldn't be that cold, but we'll see. But things are good. Excellent. So I didn't get a chance to talk to you about it yet, but you got your package okay?
I did, and wow, thank you. I mean, it's sitting right here next to me while I'm doing my podcast. I have it up on I put it in a plastic sheath so it would protect it, and oh man, I love it.
So when for those that didn't see the stuff on social media, I went to Terrificon in Connecticut a couple months ago. And while I was there, Liam Sharp happened to be at the show. And so I got a bunch of things signed by him. And he had these prints of basically the cover with Hal and Adam Strange on it. And I knew how much Phil loved that cover and loved his version of Adam Strange. So while I was there, I bought a copy. And I texted Phil and I said, hey, I got the last one, because I did buy the last one. I just didn't tell him the last one I bought was his.
Man, it's just a great photo. And, Adam Strange looks so cool. Like, he's got that whole retro look to him in that picture. And I don't know, it's cool. I'm going to hang it up. It's definitely going on a centerpiece on my wall. That's for sure.
I hope that, they're doing an Adam Strange book. I kind of hope that Hal shows up at some point as in a guest appearance. That would be really cool.
That'd be really cool. Although, the crappy part is like, I have this vision of Liam Sharp's version of Adam Strange in my head. And now when it goes over to, I think Tom King's doing that book, if I'm not mistaken. Is it Tom King? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's going to be hard to have the comparison art going into reading this Adam Strange book, but that's okay. I like the character. I'm going to give it a shot when it's released.
Isn't it funny how we will get certain artists, their versions of a character in our head, and then it really sticks with us as kind of the definitive version when we imagine the character. And then when you go to read something else and somebody else draws the character, you kind of have this weird moment where you start comparing the two different artists. It's weird.
And it works. And you're right. You're totally right. It affects, I don't know how you feel about it, but a lot of times it'll actually affect my reading because I'll be distracted by, the art is art. So it's relative to what you think of it. And, not everybody likes everybody's art. And, and I hate to say it, but other people like art that I don't like. So it's no knock against the artist, but there's just some that just doesn't look good, and it distracts from the storyline. And sometimes it's kind of a muscle to get through it.
Yeah, it's strange. It depends. And especially if an artist has been on a character for a while, if they've got a long run on a character, you really start to see that as the version of the character. And yeah, it's hard sometimes to see the character drawn by somebody else because you're kind of comparing the two. And then, like you said, art is subjective. So sometimes you see some art and you can't stand it to begin with, and you really wish you had the other artist back again. I remember there for a while, I had a real issue with the art on Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. It wasn't Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. It was the Green Lantern run before that, the New 52 run with Robert Venditti, and the artist I didn't care for the way he drew Hal. I didn't like the way he drew the face. It was just I just couldn't stand it. But to each his own.
Yeah, there's some that are like that. Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. it's no knock against anybody. It's just that's all what we like, and that's usually what it revolves around anyway when we're reading them to begin with.
So, as I open the show, this is episode number 150, which is a little bit of a milestone. I mean, we haven't been around as a lot of other shows, as long as a lot of other shows, but it is a milestone. And I was going back and looking at some of the metrics as I was preparing to record this evening. And between you and myself and Bill Giancoli, we've recorded a total of over 162 hours worth of audio content. Which has gotten over 191,000 listens, which is amazing to me.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really, really cool. Has that number grown, or do you check it very, very often, or?
I don't check it too often. Every once in a while I'll go and look, and we average about 400 to 500 listens per episode, but it's kind of odd because the way the podcast host, we use Libsyn to host our podcast, you don't really get a 100% metric because some of the shows get spun out, like for YouTube, for example, those don't get counted in that metric, and certain other content providers, those listens don't factor into it, or if they've downloaded the episode, sometimes that won't show up. So it's hard to get a real true number. So I look at what stats there are is, well, that's kind of the overall good number. Cause like I said, there's no way to get a real good metric on all of it. And, I couldn't be happier when I've said it before on past episodes that when Bill and I started the show, I had no idea if anybody would give any of their time to listen to two middle-aged guys talk about Green Lantern comic books and movies and all that other stuff. And I was surprised when we started getting responses from people all over the world. And I was like, really? I just thought this was going to be one of these things that, it'd be our families listening to it and that'd be it. So I couldn't be happier. And, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. The whole point of doing the blog of OA and the podcast of OA is to kind of give back to the franchise because it's given me so much, and to try to enhance other fans' fan experience with the franchise. And so I hope that what we've done over these last 162 hours or so has entertained people, educated people, and made their fan experience with the characters better. That's really what we're shooting for.
Well said. Well said. And not only that, I was thinking about this the other day about podcasting in general. It's like, and I don't know if anybody else realizes this or not, but if you come to think about it, podcasting is the last pioneer of the radio disc jockeys. I mean, when we used to be a radio disc jockey, you used to be on the air. You didn't know who your listeners were. You didn't know who was listening. You didn't know who you were talking to the whole entire time. And a lot of it went off your radio air personality on how much people started listening to you or whatnot. And of course, the content was important. And podcasting is no different. It's all about the content and the viewers and the listeners that you reach and what they like listening to. And plus the friendly chatter, because I remember talking to Bill a bunch of times, and he's such a great guy. And I mean, and yourself, the guru of the Green Lantern mythos, and it's like talking to you guys, talking to you every couple weeks or so. It's like, it's just fun to know that we're reaching people out there, and it's flattering in a way because it's like, okay, my voice is reaching somebody, across the ocean or whatnot. And like I said, man, it's like radio disc jockeys all over again.
So it's ironic that you talk about radio because I actually used to be on the radio. I started out in college, and it's kind of sad. The person that got me into radio passed away not too long ago, but he used to be the radio station manager, and I would go and hang out with him in the mornings and just sitting in with him for a while. I learned how, the equipment worked and so on. And one day he left me in the radio station while he went up to get some chocolate milk from the cafeteria. Our college's cafeteria had really good chocolate milk. And so he would go up and get a glass of chocolate milk, and then he didn't come back down. Well, he'd left one record already queued up, so I knew enough to hit the lever to get the next record to start. But I knew after the second song, somebody's supposed to talk. Well, he didn't come back down. So, of course, my sense of responsibility kicked in. And so I started talking, and I queued up another record. And what I didn't know was the son of a gun was upstairs in the cafeteria laughing his backside off because he did it on purpose.
That's awesome.
So I ended up going on the radio, and I was very shy, so it was a big thing for me to do. But I ended up doing that, and then after I got out of college, while I was trying to find a job in my field, I actually did work on AM radio for a while. But yeah, you kind of create a persona. Now in this show, I'm pretty much who I am. But when I was on college radio, I had to have a whole persona, and I used to always wear sunglasses, so everybody used to start calling me Hollywood. So that was my disc jockey name in college, was Hollywood.
I mean, that's the biggest difference, right? It's like they had disc jockey names back then, because my brother was on the radio for a while, and he used to be called Mike Dallas, and he was on some station in Kentucky. It was gosh, he started out on AM like you did, and then he ended up moving to FM channel, and it was some rock station for a while, and ended up changing over to country, or change their format over to country or something like that. Anyway. But yeah, you put on their persona, but that's the difference between that and podcasting, because podcasting is just really all about the content and who you are as a person in correlation with it, you know?
Yeah. It was funny because Friday nights, the radio station would do dances at some of the high schools. So all the good records would be gone from the radio station. And that was when I had my show. So I was stuck playing things like Weird Al Yankovic and some of these things that nobody wanted to hear. And people would call up and complain. But it's like I didn't have any of the records. I only had one turntable and a cassette deck. So it was a little crazy, but it's fun.
That's awesome.
So, this is episode number 150, and I thought maybe I wanted to do something kind of special, because I said earlier, we've done about 162 hours worth of content, but we've had 191,000 listens, and I wanted to do something kind of neat. So back when I went to Terrificon a few months ago and got that print signed, I took with me some lithographs that they did when the Green Lantern series first came out. And I didn't realize that they did this. DC did it to promote the series. And I was going to my local comic shop, Heroes Your Mom Threw Out in Elmira Heights, New York. And Jared Iosa, who's the store manager there, he's been kind of an unofficial sponsor of the show since the beginning. Back when we did t-shirts, he actually paid for a whole print run of t-shirts for me. And he's just been very, very supportive. And he gave me a pack of the lithographs. So when I was in Terrificon, I got not one, but I got 15 of them signed that I want to give away to listeners of the podcast of OA, celebrating episode number 150. So what I'm going to do is set up a contest that I'll probably run between the date that this show gets released and probably the middle of November, like November 15th. I'll set a date up for it. But I will set up a contest, and we will pick 15 people at random to get signed lithographs from Liam Sharp. They're 10 by 13 inches, so they're not like an 11 by 17. They're 10 by 13. But it's the cover of Green Lantern #1. And I'm going to say this up front: they're not all in pristine shape because I had to carry them around with me all day. Some of the corners are a little dinged. But when you put them in a frame, you're not going to notice the difference. And again, it's a free Liam Sharp autograph. So I want to do that as a thank you to all the people that have been listening to us from the beginning and have been listening to us, ever since, and making the show what it is.
And not only that, like a true fan, and I know you can attest to this, but a lot of times perfection isn't about what the collector's item is all about. It's about having the collector's item itself in correlation to who you are as a fan base, because a lot of the older comic stuff that we pick up, you and I, of course, we come from a bigger library of back issues and stuff. And I know that it's few and far between finding the pristine ones that you long for. But, I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of times when I'll just settle for a 4-point rating or a 3-point rating just because I want to have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's the sentimental value to take into account and what you personally deem of value. And one of the things I'll do, even though I don't have a way to do a certified certificate of authenticity, I'm going to issue a certificate of authenticity with each one of them that shows a picture of him signing them. And I'll sign it just so that if anybody were to question it down the road, at least you've got some kind of documentation that shows this is a legit autograph, because Liam's autograph is very, very stylized.
Yeah, I noticed that when I got mine. I was like, wow, that's a different way to sign things.
But I don't know how many conventions Liam does throughout the year. And I thought, well, this is something I can do to give back to people. I've often said that this show and the blog to me is about giving back to the franchise. And I want to give something back to the people that listen. And I hope that people, I mean this in the utmost humbleness. I really do appreciate people taking the time out of their day to either, visit the blog or listen to a show. I really do appreciate that. So, I want to give back to people for making this a success, and making it more than just somebody's passion project.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it's like you said, you put your all into this project, and of course I'm just a newbie to it. So I came along, after it's well been underway, and you got a lot of listeners out there and a lot of people out there that, maybe do count on, looking for that podcast that comes out because they don't have access to the content because they're in different countries, and you and I have talked a lot about, publications and stuff like that. And some of these remote areas where we get listeners from sometimes are so far behind the mainstream that, they could be a year or so long off the mark.
True. And I guess while I'm in this vein of thought, I do want to give some thanks out to some people, one being Jared Ayosa from Here's Your Mom Throughout Comics, obviously one being Bill Giancoli, whose idea was to make a podcast, and to you, Phil, as well, for stepping in when, unbeknownst to you, I was in need of finding someone to take over for Bill. So, you three gentlemen have been hugely influential in this continuing to go and to make it as far as it's gone.
It's kismet, and I miss Bill. I love listening to him talk. I like hearing his laugh, and he was always fun to listen to whenever you guys aired.
He loves listening to himself talk too. No, no. And if he listens to this, he knows I'm joking because I love him like a brother. So. But yeah, he's a great guy, and his ability to play off of my stupid sense of humor was always very important in the beginning as we were starting to build this up.
Well, sure, because I mean, you guys were together long enough. You build a camaraderie, and of course, you guys knew each other personally. You guys probably knew each other personally before you started it, so you come into it with that kind of strength, then you just got to. You're talking to a lot of other people that you just don't know about. So you gotta kind of put on that act more or less, but you guys nailed it. And every time you guys talked, it was always humorous, and I was always laughing and Bill was always joking and having a good time. And it's funny because Bill's past history of Green Lantern is a lot like mine. I'm not sure how much he's actually read. But I mean, you have always been the guru of the Green Lantern mythos. So, it's a lot of times where it's like, we're going to fact check with Myron before we fact check with the internet.
Well, I do appreciate that. And like I said, I love doing it. If I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it. Anyway, sure. Keeping in the Steve Miller vein, we've talked enough about the Pompatus of Love. It's time we start talking a little bit about Green Lantern number 150. So,
that's right. Good times.
Let's take a quick pause for you and I to take a pause. We'll play some kind of a promo. And when we come back, we'll talk about Green Lantern Volume 2, issue number 150, keeping in our 15 theme.
That's right.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's Light.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Myron, the 150 episode. And here we are. I'm going to go on a limb here and say that when we were trying to choose on what we were going to do for our retro review, I was kind of stumped. I was like, what should I tackle next? And, I knew you were closing in on your 150 mark. And so I just started randomly looking for 150 issues of Green Lantern, and lo and behold, this anniversary issue popped up, written by Marv Wolfman, and came out in 1982. And I was like, what the heck, we'll give this one a read because, I couldn't tell you the last time I read this issue, and I'll tell you what, I couldn't have hit the nail on the head by picking this issue, though, couldn't I?
No, you're right. It really ties into the whole antimatter Green Lantern Corps thing, and that's what's going on in this particular issue. I don't know whether people have read it. It's not a one and done issue. It's kind of the last part of a multi-part story, and what led up to this whole thing was that there was an antimatter character who comes from Qward, who is designed to go and kill Hal, and he goes to Earth, and in coming through from the antimatter universe, he loses his memory, and the character's name is Stinley. And so he runs into Goldface, and Goldface renames him Stanley, and he ends up becoming a henchman of Goldface.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in the meantime, some Ungarans, a homeworld of Abensur, they come to Earth and they kidnap Hal to try to force him to help them because their planet is in dire condition. It's actually icing over. And they want Hal to come to Ungara and rescue their planet. And Hal has this rather cavalier response because at this point in Hal's career and his life, he and Carol are in a very good place. Tom Kelmaku's not in such a good place, but he and Carol are in a really good position in their relationship. And Hal is kind of earthbound at this point. And Hal basically says, well, the Guardians, if they needed me to do something off Earth, they'd let me know. So no, I'm not going to come and help you. The Guardians stop Hal and basically tell him that, this isn't going to fly with us. You've really done a poor job in taking care of your sector. And they kind of tell him, you're going to go and have to help the Ungarans. And Hal basically says, that's it. I'm through. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. And he's going to quit the Corps after this last mission. And that's what leads up to issue 150.
Okay, so that's a little bit of the backstory I was looking at. Because I didn't go and read the issues prior to this. But it does mention the fact that, he's no longer a Green Lantern. Of course, Rissia shows up in this one too. And she's a rookie Green Lantern, I would assume, at that time. So, and she mentions a lot of that about Hal not being a Green Lantern anymore because the Guardians told her that he walked away.
Yep. And Stinley beats Hal and takes him to Qward, and that's where this issue starts out.
Which is great. From Qward with hate. All right, so it opens up with Stinley, right? Coming through the, I guess that's the portal you were talking about to the antimatter universe?
Yep, yeah, he's coming from Earth and bringing Hal along for the ride. And
he throws Hal down on the court. So I guess Hal's meant to face this court, right? For abandoning the Corps.
Well, yeah, he's been brought to Qward, and they're basically gonna do him over one. And in the meantime, Aricia had gone to Ungara to help Hal rescue the planet, and she gets hurt. And then she says, "Oh, geez, something's happened to Hal. He's disappeared. This is a job for the Guardians," and she's off to go and get help for Hal.
Which absolutely leads to nothing, because as anybody knows, the Guardians are a bunch of malicious little trolls. And speaking of the Guardians, it's kind of funny because they're not as prominent of a characterization role in the past few years as they always have been. You don't see them that much like you used to anymore.
No, not really. And actually, I think Grant Morrison has kind of taken them back to their original roots, where they weren't misguided. They were just perhaps just a little out of touch.
Right.
But you see Hal on Qward, and they have basically created an antimatter Green Lantern Corps, and they have a power battery there. And the bad news is if Hal makes contact with any of the antimatter lanterns, he's going to blow up. The downside is the antimatter lanterns have a very short lifespan because they die too, and they die rather easily. They're pretty brittle. So, yeah. but you got Hal kind of stuck on his own, facing a whole army of these antimatter lanterns.
And what do you think of the Guardians of the antimatter universe? They're kind of creepy looking, aren't they?
They are very creepy. I mean, they drew the Qwardian with these big bugged out eyes. That was the whole design structure for these guys. It's interesting. I think it's interesting that the Green Lantern rings, or not Green Lantern rings, the antimatter Green Lantern rings have a very stylized look, and they've gone with a blue color scheme, like a navy blue color scheme instead of the green.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Darkseid's colors, that gray and that blue.
Yeah, kind of. You're right. They still get the white gloves, but
interesting. Right. So they're not too similar to the antimatter lanterns you're going to see in in Morrison's run.
No, these are far tamer.
Yeah. So anyway, moving on. So we see Hal Jordan. Of course, we see Aricia. She goes to get the Guardians' help, and then of course they insist on telling her that he left the Corps and that they no longer want to help him. So I guess what happens is a conference call between the Guardians on Oa and then the Guardians on Qward, right?
Yeah, the Guardians on Qward actually kind of can see what's going on Oa. I don't know whether they've set up a ring camera or what, or what, but yeah, they can see what's going on, and
right.
it's not a good scene, but yeah, they're basically saying we're not helping Hal. And so Hal's left to his own devices, and he does a really good job of getting himself free and taking on the traditional weaponers of Qward. But when he gets to the point where he's got all of the antimatter Green Lanterns, he's really outnumbered, and it's really going to be a losing battle. But Aricia, she takes it and goes to Earth and finds the portal to come through from Earth to Oa or to Qward, and she's determined to help Hal. And in this stage, you kind of you see the beginnings of this whole. Hal calls her honey a couple times. He means is an enduring term for a young kid, but you see Aricia with definitely having a crush on Hal.
It was kind of an awkward. That conversation between them was a little bit, I don't know, it felt like misplaced, but then I had to think to myself, well, this is the 80s, it's not the same kind of rhetoric they use and narrative that exists in comics these days, as opposed to then. But it was just kind of like when I was reading there back and forth, it's kind of like, it was funny because Hal's trying to teach her, hey, that's just a term of, like you said, a term of endearment, and there's nothing behind it. But then again, why would Aricia feel that there was something behind it to begin with, right? She's an alien. How does she know the coming ons of the male persona from Earth, right?
Right. But eventually Hal basically decides, well, whenever time a antimatter Green Lantern dies, another one kind of jumps into its place. I mean, they're like pumping these guys out quickly. These are like the clone troopers of the antimatter universe. And so they decide, the only way to really do this, to win this thing, is to destroy the power battery. And so he goes on a mission to try and do that, but he's outnumbered and outgunned. It's an interesting battle. Classic Joe Staton art.
It really is a cool battle to go back and forth. And then, of course, you get to the big page where the whole entire Green Lantern Corps shows up to help him. And then you got all the familiars there.
Yeah, and
Arcus Chummock.
Yeah, you get the Arcus Chummock. Yeah, he was a big popular character at that point. And you find out basically that the Guardians knew that they were being bugged. So this whole thing about Hal being kicked out and him resigning was kind of a ruse in a way, to allow him to go undercover, which again sounds very similar to what's going on in the Morrison run in certain places.
It really does. That's why I was like, when I first picked this to read it, it was just a shot, and I was like, what the heck? I'll give it a try. And then revisiting, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of parallels in here, But again, we always go back to what we said about Morrison. I mean, he knows the source material, so. It could be very well that he got his inspiration from a lot of these books that Marv Wolfman wrote.
True. And, it's one of those things where the whole thing with Hal and using his, not doing what he should be doing and, kind of ignoring the responsibility, that part Hal goes, you're right. I was actually wrong about that. But then the Guardians tell him what was going on and want him to take on this mission. And he agrees to do it anyway, in a way to try to atone for his actions.
Right. Because that's what he's known for. I mean, he does his own thing anyway half the time. Right. But yeah, I thought it was a cool issue, and it kind of like shedded a little bit of just a little bit of a different light on what's going on now in the Green Lantern series with Morrison and Sharp. It kind of gave more depth to what I was reading, because I had completely forgot about this prior issue and the antimatter universe, and then this antimatter Lantern Corps. And I was like, oh, this is really, really cool. And this really, really helps out with better source material to know where the inspiration came from, when he's bringing these stories forward. Of course, they look considerably different now than Joe Staten's art back then, but I mean, it's really good artwork. I enjoy reading these older comics because a lot of these older artists and these writers were a product of their time, and it comes through in a lot of their material.
Yeah, and Joe Staten has he has a typical definitely a style that stands out on its own. When you see Joe Staten artwork, you really know it's his.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I like his Hal Jordan. His Hal Jordans look pretty cool.
And when they get to the end, even though the Guardians are grateful that Hal did what he did and they stopped the Antimatter Lanterns, they're still not letting him off the hook for his behavior, and they tell him, you're going to have to spend a year off of Earth. And he says, please give me a month. I've got work that I got to complete out to help my friends, so on and so forth. And the Guardians give him 24 hours to get himself ready. And
of course, a little tidbit of information: the time of one power ring charge.
Correct. And he agrees to do it. And then, there's at the end, there's a whole, almost like an extra story at the back, which they start out with a meanwhile, but it has its own credits. And it's interesting that during this time, Marv Wolfman was setting up this whole backstory revolving around Ferris Air. And this was really when Hal had a really strong supporting cast, because Ferris Air felt very much very, very real. It wasn't just a backdrop for things. And so there was this whole story going on in the background with Congressman Block. And it's really kind of cool, the backstory, that originally when Carl Ferris started up Ferris Air, he was doing that with a guy by the name of Conrad Block. And Block was he was a test pilot, and they started Ferris Block Air Cargo together. And Ferris, being the businessman, he got kind of frustrated with Block not holding up his end of things, and he basically kicked Conrad Block out of the company, changed the name completely to Ferris Air, and left Block to his own resources. And he was very disgruntled and started his own company called Block Air. And he eventually passed away. And his son was a congressman, and basically they had this running subplot where Ferris Air started losing all of their governmental contracts because Block was interfering with all of those things. And this is kind of
okay.
So this story is where this end piece, they find out basically Block has got people doing some research to try to find out who Green Lantern is, because they realize Green Lantern shows up at Ferris Aircraft a lot. They determined that Hal is Green Lantern at that point. And they're basically trying to destroy Hal and destroy Ferris Air at any cost. And this issue goes on when there's it's almost a whole regular issue. I want to say it's like a 10 to 15 page story that's all about this stuff and stuff going on with Carl Ferris. And Carl Ferris basically finds out the Block has been doing all this stuff and this manipulation in the background. And so there's this whole industrial espionage story going on, which there's no Green Lantern in any of this. It's all, it's all Ferris and Ferris Air. And you see Tom Kalmaku going through kind of a midlife crisis and struggling with his ability to succeed as basically the person, the breadwinner in his family, and not doing a very well job. And he's afraid he's gonna lose his job. And the rumors are Ferris Air is going to go under because they're losing their contracts. And it's a really interesting story, but it's something that they did to try to flesh out Hal's supporting cast, much like you had a lot of drama around the Daily Planet and Wayne Enterprises in the Superman and Batman books during that era.
And it played off really well because, the story before that was Hal Jordan going back to Earth for a 24-hour period of time. So lumping this one in there with it, and of course all this backstory about Hal Jordan being Green Lantern, kind of makes you wonder what happens next when he returns to Earth, and he's only going to be there for a little while. And if they do something to him at that time, then he doesn't return to Oa, and then of course the Guardians are coming after him after that.
Right, and this issue kind of ends with Carl Ferris was flying to Washington with his proof that Congressman Block is corrupt, and basically a double agent comes on board the jet with them, and the jet crashes out in the middle of nowhere, And so you've got Carl Ferris and this younger guy, and Carl Ferris has got a pistol, and he's going to try to escort him all the way back to 100 miles back to civilization. And who's gonna outlive that? And at the meantime, you've got a pilot and Carol flying in to try to do some of their own espionage at Block Air. So it's just a really, different and unique storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, it played well off the story before too. So I don't know. Couldn't tell you what even happened in the next issue, because that's something I'd have to revisit at another time.
Yeah, it was an interesting story. It goes on from there, but yeah, he's got to figure out what's going to happen with all that stuff. And Hal's left there like, I'm going to be leaving Ferris Air and leaving Carol in her hour of need as Ferris Air's about to crumble around her. So it's a neat story.
It really is kind of cool. Well, both of these stories were really kind of cool in their own right.
Yeah, it was an
I'll tell
interesting
you what,
run.
And I've always enjoyed Marv Wolfman. I know you've mentioned him a few times before in past podcasts and stuff. And, he may not have been the best person to write Hal Jordan Green Lantern books, but I enjoyed his run when he had it. I wouldn't say he's one of my favorites, but he definitely ranks up there.
Yeah, he had a good run, and I think he did a good job of kind of shepherding the character there for a while. You had people that had different short runs, but he had kind of a notable run in terms of just the quality of stories, and it wasn't a grand slam kind of thing like a Jeff Johns kind of a run by any stretch, but it was a workman-like, it held the fort down.
So there you have it, guys. Green Lantern, issue number 150 from March 1982. Pick it up, check it out. I'm not sure if this is in a collected or not. I would assume it would be.
I'm not sure if it is or not, because it seems like whenever DC does the reprints, they get up to about the Denny O'Neil era, and then they stop, and then they start another set of reprints all over again. So I'm not sure how much they've done at this era, but it's definitely worth picking up and looking at.
And it had a $1 sticker price on
it. Yeah, back in the day, I don't think you could probably find. Maybe you might be able to find it for $1 these days, but
it probably would be the same price.
Yeah. All right, well, let's come back. We've got one piece of listener feedback, so let's take a quick pause, and we'll come back and we'll talk about what one of our listeners has to say.
All right, sounds good, Mark.
Well, Phil, we do have one piece of listener feedback, and this comes to us from YouTube. And this is a gentleman by the name of Green Kid. And basically, he's talking about our last episode where we were talking about the timeline for the DC Universe. Mm-hmm. And, there's rumors about things that, we'll go into when you talk about his comment. But basically he's saying, if they decide to do the Marvel thing where they replace all of our characters with new younger versions, this will be my jumping off point, which is fine with me because I'll call it a day and thank DC for everything. But that would be it for me, collecting and reading current stories, and I'll focus on filling my Green Lantern back issue Silver Age collection. And what Green Kid is talking about is, there's this whole timeline thing that DC's talking about. And since you and I talked about it, DC had said that what was picked up on by fans and people were figuring out what was on that timeline, that wasn't the final version. There's still things in flux. But one of the things that has come out of that is that Bleeding Cool, which I hate giving them any publicity because I think it's a trash website, but they get quite a few sensationalistic headlines, and they have some inside resources that other sites like mine don't have, and quite often they end up being correct. But one of the things that Bleeding Cool has been saying is that there's going to be a fifth generation, and that basically all of the versions of the characters that we know will be replaced by brand new characters or fairly new characters, and that characters that you may expect to don the mantle of, say, Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman or Green Lantern or Flash, that's not what's going to happen. It's not going to be a Damian's going to become Batman kind of thing. And this started out with them saying that Luke Fox, who has been Batwing, is going to become the new Batman. And one of the things that Bleeding Cool is saying is that originally it looked like it was going to be Teen Lantern was going to take over for Green Lantern, but now it's looking like, according to their rumor, that Joel Mullen from Far Sector will be the Green Lantern. And so there's been a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of responses from fans. I feel like before I add my commentary, I'm wondering what you think about all that.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I haven't read anything. I haven't read Far Sector yet to really draw a conclusion on how they would invent that kind of move. Does that make sense? I mean, it just seems like a bold move to pivot from such predominant characters like, Hal Jordan, Jon Stewart, Guy Gardner, Kyle Rayner. If you're going to stick with the Lantern Corps, I just don't what I guess I don't get is why wouldn't they pivot it in a way that it could be like a Green Lantern Corps type of forward momentum moving, with books moving forward. I'm not stingy enough to where I want all these Lantern titles, but I am stingy enough to know that the Green Lantern Corps is much, to me, like Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is, and I don't see why it would be far believed to have like a Green Lantern Corps title book moving forward, especially when you got Joe Mullen, who hasn't really done anything to prove herself in the Green Lantern universe. I mean, her book's not even out there yet. We don't even know what it's going to be like. I read a little bit of the preview on the Bleeding Cool stuff, and I was like, okay, well, I mean, I'm interested, and I like the outfit. I think her design looks pretty cool, but I don't know if I'd jump the gun and say this is what they're going to go with moving forward for all the Green Lantern stuff, but I don't make the decisions. And I mean, I hate saying this because I'm a fan of DC, but their decision making hasn't really been their strongest points of late. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have to say, at least in my own opinion, since Bendis came over, I've noticed kind of a downward trend, at least in terms of my own interest in the DC books. And I gotta be honest. I was on the fence about the whole Far Sector book to begin with. Hearing this, it makes me less want to read it, only because I know that the only thing that DC really listens to is sales. And if I support the book and I buy the book, it's essentially giving my vote of endorsement for the character, and I don't. I think we've already got too many Green Lanterns as it is. The last thing we needed was another Earth Green Lantern. I think the Far Sector would have been a far more interesting story if we had maybe chosen a character like Sheriff Martin or Aricia or Princess Iolande, or found a way to make Soranik Natu a Green Lantern again, or any other, Tusix, or any number of other characters. If you want to, if you were bound and determined to make it a female character, there were any number of other female alien Green Lanterns that would have made it just as a compelling story as making yet another Earth Lantern, let alone another Earth Lantern from North America. So I'm even less interested in Far Sector, having heard that, and I'm finding myself kind of in an odd position where I feel like I need to buy the book to review it because people are going to look to me to review the book, but at the same time, I don't want to give it any money I don't have to. So I'm not sure what I feel, and it's interesting looking at the reactions from the fan community, and at least in looking at Twitter and some of the message boards and so on, that I don't hear a whole lot of people that are happy with this idea. I think people were like, well, why can't we keep Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz? They were already kind of the next incarnation. Right. So you've got those people with that concern, and you've got people like who are really big Jon Stewart fans who are like, well, when is Jon going to finally get a turn? And you've got the Guy Gardner fans that are happy to see anything with Guy, and they're not calling for him to get a book, but they certainly would love to see a Green Lantern Corps book. You mentioned that you felt like Green Lantern is kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy, and I almost look at it like X-Men with the regard that you could have multiple teams carrying a book. Much like you have X Factor and X Force, that you could do multiple team books. And maybe you don't have to get back to having 5 books, but could a certain set of characters carry a book? I mean, could Simon and Jessica carry a book, or would Kyle and Guy be able to carry a book together, or maybe a Guy Arkillo book or something? I certainly think that you could do something with that, or even if you had a book that rotated characters in and out, like we've often talked about an anthology book. I think there's more out there that could happen, but this whole 5G concept, I just don't see it succeeding, because I don't think that there's an audience out there that wants to buy books with the DC universe where all of the characters have somehow magically all been replaced at the same time. I don't see that as being that attractive. Now, if DC does an approach where they do some 5G books, and then they do 4G books, and maybe some 3G books and 2G books, and they scatter it, and this allows them to broaden the line. That could be interesting because you don't have to buy the 5G books if you don't want to, and if you can still find a Simon Jessica book or whatever you're interested in with a different branding, then that's one thing. But I hate the idea that our timeline is stuck to somewhere down the road. These characters are all going to be replaced, kind of like Marvel Reborn. That was disastrous, and I don't want to see that happen to DC. So I'm quite frankly, I'm not thrilled with it, and I'm not calling for pitchforks and daggers at this point and torches, because it's still all rumor. We don't know what's really going to happen. And my hope is that if DC was planning on doing that, they've seen the reactions from the fan community and maybe change their course if that's indeed what they were going to do. And again, we don't know. But I like anything else, I have this, I don't know, my whole approach is that I have to take a wait and see attitude. I need to see what's going to actually happen. You know, when DC decided to turn Hal evil and we went through Emerald Twilight, I was really dissatisfied with that whole thing, and how I thought the story was. I thought Emerald Twilight was an atrocious story, and I thought it really did not do the character. It wasn't true to the character's form, especially given how the issue before Emerald Twilight finished. But at the same time, I was like, okay, if this is where DC's going, let me give it a shot. And I did give it a shot. It wasn't for me. I didn't really find the cow books that interesting. I gave it about a year, and then I was like, nah, I'm done, and I walked away from DC Comics. Would I do it again? Probably I would. If it gets to a point where all we've got is the 5G stuff, if that's what DC's going to do, I probably would call it a day, much like our listener Green Kid is saying, because I don't have all the Silver Age books. I can go back and spend my money filling those books in, and that's probably what I will do. What does that mean for the blog and the podcast? I'm not sure. Again, like I said, I have to adapt a wait and see attitude and see what's actually going to transpire.
Well, with me, DC lately has just been, they seem like they're just, I hate to use their expression, but they're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, and whatever stays up there, they're going to go with, and whatever doesn't. I kind of feel like, and I know this isn't a podcast for that, but I kind of feel like Joker was kind of the same way. They didn't know how Joker was going to do. So, they kind of just threw it at the wall in hopes that it was going to be reinvent the wheel or do a really good thing for the characterization and stuff. And then, of course, comes your criticism, and then of course comes your worries and your fear that it's going to invoke violence, and it gets through all that static or whatnot. And then of course later on you hear how well it's doing, and then you hear about them, okay, well now they're going to start a whole Joker universe kind of thing, and it kind of mirrors Black Label when DC did their Black Label titles, if they're still doing them or whatnot. And it's kind of like, okay, you didn't know it was going to do that well to begin with, and then you got lambasted because of the content. But now all of a sudden it's doing well, so you're starting to feed the monkey. Then it's like, okay, you know how much money you're making, so now you're going to automatically jump on board. And DC is at that point, and I think in their establishment where they have to, because they're too busy trying to focus on playing catch up to Marvel. And I don't think they need to take that approach. I think the approach that I think they need to take is their fan base. And adhering to their fan base, because Marvel did it with all their films and all their movies, and that's why they did so well. And ironically, I just don't think DC does that. I think they do it on their own, thinking that they got the right thing, but they don't pay attention to how the fan base is going to react, and then they pay the consequences later, much like Justice League and much like Batman v Superman. I like the movies in their own right, but I don't think that's what the fan base really wanted. And if they were to listen to what the fan base was clamoring for, they'd be able to produce content that people would be happy about and pay money for.
Yeah. And I think DC's done better, at least film wise, with, the Aquaman and the Wonder Woman film and Shazam and Joker. It's interesting. I don't know if you've seen the Joker movie, but there's not even a DC logo in front of that movie.
Yeah. And I heard that too. And it's like, okay, well, so, and I hate to say this, but sometimes I think that confuses fans, because they're like, okay, well, isn't Joker, then when we're going to see Batman now? When for all intents and purposes, the Joker could, as a character, do his own thing without having Batman as a supporting cast.
Right.
He's that popular of a character. So it's much like Harley Quinn at this point now. And we've talked about it in the past before, where Harley Quinn was such a C-list character. Look at her now. She's just as big as Batman, and she's got her own following. And then, of course, you got us fans that like Green Lantern, and we get fed scraps from the table. There's nothing left.
I mean, I think
and then
I think DC's in a position where they need to do something because, when you look at comic sales, like if you go and look at the September comic sales, and again, this is only from Comic-Con and they don't track they don't track digital sales and things like that. But when you look at DC's performance, I mean, Marvel's winning the battle, but it's because they're flooding the market with so many books. But when you look at DC, I mean, Doomsday Clock is the number 7 selling book, and that's the highest performing book in DC's entire lineup. If you look at DC's products, it takes Batman number 78, hits the 11th place. That's the first regular ongoing book that isn't an event and isn't a number 1.
Yeah, I mean, and that's their hot seller, Batman. It's always
sure.
Batman with them.
Well, you can kind of understand it. I mean, as much as we don't like it, when you look at the sales figures, that's what people are buying, and that's unfortunate. When you look at Green Lantern's performance in this big picture, if you take into account all the event books and the Batman books, and you take Justice League out of the picture, I think Superman performed better, and that's about it. Other than that, then it's Green Lantern, and that's the number 39 book with 41,000 copies. I mean, would you really think that a Grant Morrison book would only sell 41,000 copies? I'm surprised.
No, I am too. I mean, of course, then you got to take into account if there's a fatigue, when it comes to these books, and like this whole 5G movement that we've been talking about. I mean, you can call it what you want. You can call it a relaunch, you can call it a revamp, you can call it. I mean, it's just basically starting over, and fans get tired of that. It's like, okay, we need to start over again. We just had the New 52. We just had Rebirth, and it doesn't seem like that long ago, but I mean, I hate to say this, but there were times when you didn't have such a relaunch or a reinvention of the wheel with characterization as frequent as you do with these big publishers nowadays.
Yeah, I think, it used to be everybody talked about event fatigue. It seems like now it's relaunch fatigue.
Right.
But,
I don't know. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not ready to, like I said, I'm not ready to call in for flaming torches and pitchforks because it's really too early to see, because we don't know what the actual plans are. We don't know whether Bleeding Cool is correct in this or not. They have a good track record, but at the same time, I don't know. They're not, as far as I'm concerned, a very respectable website. There's a lot of garbage, I think, that's published there. So who knows? I mean, they're more reliable than we got this covered, but
right.
We'll see. But anyway, thanks again to everybody who's listening and has listened and makes the show part of your fan experience. We will be back in a couple of weeks to talk about Green Lantern Black Star's number 1.
Man, I'm looking forward to that. I think this 3-issue series is going to be very, very cool. I'm really, really looking forward to it when it's released.
Reality is going to be warped. Who knows what we're going to experience?
I know. It's going to be a trip.
So until next time, we'll be back, like I said, be back in a couple of weeks. Keep your power ring charged, treat each other well, and make every day your brightest day.
And we'll talk to you guys soon.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.